You've probably heard of a woman scorned, but what you really need to be aware of is A Mother's Rage, which is a new Hindi series on Netflix. Its unassuming lead is someone you certainly do not want to cross. Upon accidentally killing a mafia leader, a middle-aged woman is unwittingly swept into the underworld, becoming an unsuspecting adversary. So the story follows Sheil, a doctor at a sort of old age facility. She's married and has an adult daughter who is mute. Now, one day the daughter is distraught, and as Sheil is trying to find out what's wrong, the daughter is struck and killed by an oncoming truck. The circumstances are a bit odd to Sheil, and when she gets a weird apology from the driver of the truck, she sets out to find out why her daughter was really killed. This is a 6-episode series, with each of those eps being right around that 45-ish minute mark. Now, because Sheil appears to be just a regular person with no special set of skills outside of her occupation, there is a little bit of disbelief that needs to be suspended at certain times. Now, as Sheil uncovers a clue, she finds that they lead to more clues, and then she is going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of something that she doesn't totally understand, nor is she really prepared to handle. She uncovers this web of organized crime, and her discoveries come about pretty naturally, meaning that she'll stumble on some clue, which then leads her someplace else, and after a bit she finds some connection to one other thing. The mystery aspect of the show really works well. Now, I was hooked, and I wanted to find out where things would lead and who was ultimately responsible for the death of the daughter. Each episode also gives us small flashbacks to when the daughter was alive, which then builds out more of the story each time. And these are good insights into who the daughter was, and even more importantly, her relationships that then shed a ton of light on the whole situation. There are portions within the story that somewhat distract from the main narrative, and I thought that they were kind of an odd inclusion because they actually worked against me liking Sheil. There's a storyline that involves a teenage boy that Sheil and her husband have a connection with, and then there's another storyline that focuses a lot on the relationship between Sheil and her husband. In both of these scenarios, Sheil comes across as cold, mean, rude, sometimes even cruel. Although most of the series I can get behind her pursuit and even her actions, when it came to her interpersonal relationships where family and friends were concerned, she's portrayed as a terrible and unloving person, which then makes it hard to root for her. Plus, in those storylines, they didn't really add anything to the central narrative. Now, I almost would have preferred that Sheil to have been a single mom, who then works to uncover the truth of what happened to her daughter. I mean, her actions then remain the same, just without the misguided distractions of family members that don't really contribute to the story anyway. Now, from an action standpoint, this was a lot of fun. Sheil can be ruthless when she wants to be, and although some of the outcomes were not what she intended, there are others that she was clearly planning and scheming, and then because she's getting just some justice on terrible people, it feels good to root for her in these instances. And because she's not doing things that are over the top, the situations are believable for the most part. Now, there was one scene where she's scaling this wall to get entry into a place. That did feel a little far-fetched. But aside from that, she uses her medical knowledge and then even quick thinking to execute plans and accomplish her goals. I think as a character, she comes across as believable. There's a timidness and apprehension that is evident in a lot of her mannerisms. And her body language suggests somebody who's fearful and downtrodden, even terrified in certain situations. But there are also points where she displays a sort of hopeful desperation, mostly out of necessity, where then she rises to an occasion, even though it's not something that she's planned on undertaking. I love how one situation leads to a complication that then influences another situation. This helps to keep the mystery alive and fluid, but not in a frustrating way. To have an answer or solution continually shifting could be annoying, but here it plays out more naturally, so when Sheil accomplishes one thing, it wouldn't naturally lead to a resolution, but instead is just one more piece of the puzzle that she's completed, putting her one step closer to figuring out why her daughter was killed. As we got towards the end of the season, I was beginning to get fearful that we just wouldn't get any answers, but we do get a series of resolutions. And as frustrating as the conclusion is, we do get an answer, but then it also works to set up a second season. I really could have seen this as just utilizing one more episode to then fully wrap it all up and make it a limited series, but apparently the show wants to keep it going, so hopefully there's going to be enough content to build out another engaging season. For the majority of this, the storytelling is cohesive and it flows well, but there are small portions that have me scratching my head to understand some of the contexts. Now, a little bit of that may just be a difference in culture. Like for example, there's this relationship that Sheil and her husband have with another couple and their son. While the actual relationships are explained, I didn't totally get how they came about. And this wasn't enough to make the show unenjoyable, but it did raise questions for me, especially with how much time was then devoted to this aspect of the story. Now, this is a fairly violent show, but they don't always highlight all of the violence. Now, sometimes we just see the actions without seeing the violence actually being inflicted. But then there are times where we get to watch some brutality, and when it does that, it gets pretty gnarly. There are a couple of scenes of torture that I was shocked that they showed, especially because in other instances where somebody was like being beaten, they didn't show the full imagery. There are also some gunfights that don't shy away from the gore, which made for some rather exciting situations. These also came on at unexpected times, so the suddenness was also shocking, but it was in a good way. So overall, the mystery and intrigue of the show kept me engaged the entire way through. And despite some story elements that felt like they were either ill-explained or maybe even distractions, on the whole, the narrative builds out a very compelling revenge story featuring a lead that is wildly unexpected. The action is carried out well, and I really enjoyed how the situations felt believable, even when they were somewhat larger than life. And even though I think that this could have been made into a limited series by just adding an additional episode, I am intrigued at where the show is going to go in a second season. There's no sex or nudity, but there is a lot of profanity and a ton of violence. I give A Mother's Rage 4 out of 5 couches. So what's a good revenge story that you've seen? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.